County Parks and Open Space this year. That's what the purpose of these stakeholder meetings is. The primary purpose is to share that information with you and then to hear any questions you have about the activities that we've done on our properties here in this last year. We're going to have about an hour and a half long meeting. There'll be roughly half of that time taken up by some staff presentations. And then the other half will be for our staff to hear your questions and comments. And as in past years, we enjoy hearing the kinds of questions and concerns that you have about our program. Let's see. I'm going to be just a little bit of background. Let's advance the slide. There we go. So my name is Jeff Moline. I'm the Planning Division Manager for County Parks and Open Space. I'm going to lead off with just a little introduction, and then we're going to turn it over to Rob Alexander, our Senior Agricultural Specialist. He's going to talk about removal and control. You can see that there. And then lastly will be Susan Spalding. She's our Senior Wildlife Biologist, and she'll be speaking about some of the other things that our department does in the way of prairie dog management. We also have two other staff that I want to mention this evening. Therese Glowacki is our Resource Management Manager, and she'll be answering the Q&A portion of our presentation. I'll talk just a little bit more about that in a second. And then we have Nick Brockman, who is going to be our web administrator, and he's just a guru wizard for us here this evening and helping us run this smoothly. So with that in mind, I just wanted to go over just a few logistics before we dig into the introduction here. We have about 92 folks registered for this evening. So we are going to need to sort of keep on task so that when we have questions, we're going to break for some questions first after Rob speaks, and then we'll let Susan speak for her 20 minutes. We'll talk about Rock Creek Farm, and then we'll have the rest of the evening for questions. We do plan on wrapping up at around 6:30 this evening. However, if there are questions that linger beyond 6:30, there will be a county staff available to continue talking and discussing our prairie dog management. Let's see. And then one last thing in terms of logistics, when it comes time for questions, please hit the raise your hand button on the Zoom control, and then I will recognize you, and then we'll hear your question. I'd like you to just introduce yourselves. You can, if you want, you can tell us roughly what part of the county you live in, and then please be free to ask your question, and then we'll have staff answer that. Let's see. There also could be opportunities in the Q&A section. So Therese will be answering those Q&A questions as we go along. There might be occasions when she'll want to elevate those question and answers up to the live meeting, and we'll try and answer those questions live. Let's see. I think that's the extent of, oh, you know, the other thing I usually do is I do just spend just a little bit of time talking about the expectations that we have for people's conduct this evening. We've really had wonderful meetings the last several years. I appreciate everybody's attention to these sorts of details, and we've had really good discussions. So when commenting, we just ask that people be courteous, brief, constructive. Non-repetitive is helpful too, since we're expecting quite a few people that may have questions. One other thing is challenge the policies, not people. Our staff here, we've got a 21-year-old prairie dog management plan that's been updated numerous times, but that's really the document that we follow as staff. And so if you have questions about how we do things, it's really going to fall back on that policy. And so the idea here is to help retain a healthy dialogue about the policy and not to personalize any of the comments. So we appreciate that very much. It's also helpful, as I mentioned before, to stay on topic and stay involved. We ask that you hear us when we're telling you about the things that we've done this past year, and we expect you to expect the same of us, and we will be very interested to hear and listen to your comments and respond accordingly. Lastly, expect this conversation to continue. This, as I mentioned earlier, this is a meeting to update you on the kinds of things that we've done in this last year. If people have real concerns about our program, they want to see changes, that's a conversation that we're going to need to continue, and we will be happy to continue that conversation. So with that, I think those are kind of the ground rules, and hopefully we've given you enough information about the tools so we can have a really constructive meeting. Again, thank you so much, all of you, for spending some time with us this evening to listen to us and then get a chance to talk with us as well. We appreciate it. So let's go to the next, slide, Susan. So again, I mentioned earlier that we have a prairie dog management plan. It's been in effect since 1999. It's been updated a number of times. That's really the document that guides our management.
Hey, Jeff, I just want to insert one thing real quick.
Please.
That this meeting is being recorded and it will be posted afterwards. And all the questions that are asked have your name attached with them, and we'll make those available after the meeting as well. So that's all.
Thank you very much, Nick. I forgot to do that. Appreciate it. So again, we have this plan. We've updated a number of times. We like to think of it as a relatively adaptively managed plan. And that's the way we view our activities out on our properties. Let's go to the next slide. There we go. So the plan itself reflects the work of our department, and our department is based on a mission that involves a variety of values, including wildlife, agriculture, recreation, and land ownership. We recognize, for example, that we are neighbors to many people in Boulder County. And so this management plan reflects those goals and the mission of our department. Next slide. And again, one of those goals for our department is an agricultural heritage and protection of the soil resources and the tradition, the heritage of production on our properties. Next slide. So we've got this mix of values within our mission statement. So how in the world are we going to manage our 100,000 acres plus that we own and manage? How are we going to manage those lands for this mix of purposes and uses? And one of the ways we do that is we take all of our properties that have suitable prairie dog habitat. So again, primarily the plains, a little bit in the foothills. And we take all those properties, and then we divide them into 3 management classification categories. And that's something that's spelled out in our plan. And then we have maps that help us define those areas. Let's see what's the next advancement here on the slide. So yeah, it's in that way that we're able to manage all of the properties that we have within our county. This is our an open space map showing all the holdings that we have here in Boulder County. Let's advance to the next slide. So again, as I mentioned, we categorize those properties. It goes into 3 categories. Habitat conservation areas. Those are areas where we prioritize prairie dogs and the natural systems that come along with those areas of our system. Excuse me, those areas of our property portfolio. Next, we have multiple objective areas. We call them MOAs. These are areas where they might be within the context of an agricultural property, but we want to also preserve and protect some of the natural values and wildlife values of a particular property. And so sometimes those areas are considered multiple objective areas. And then finally, we have no prairie dog areas. Those are areas where we feel prairie dogs are incompatible with the uses that we've outlined for the property. And primarily those NPD areas are in our cultivated agricultural areas. So yeah, those are the three categories that we have for our system. And so when you look at how that plays out across our landscape, I think the next slide will be, yeah, so you can see what we have on the northern part of our system here. We're looking at a map of the prairie dogs extent on colonies extent on our open spaces. And if it's a little hard to see the color system here, but the pinkish properties are areas that are considered NPD. And so if you look in areas, for example, around and south of Longmont, you can see that many of those cropland cultivated agricultural properties are labeled and categorized as NPD. And those are properties where we will be working to remove prairie dogs on. The MOA and the HCA categories are in the lighter colors, and often many of those properties have prairie dog colonies on them. So it can be difficult to see those colors under the orange and purples, which are the depiction of the current prairie dog colonies. Let's go to the next slide. So this is down in the southern part of the the southern part of the county. And one of the things that I wanted to mention here is that really our HCA areas, we've highlighted those and grouped those into two general large, well, we have two large complexes of HCA areas. And those are the areas where you're going to hear about later tonight. Places where we're working to keep prairie dogs as an integral part of the system. We manage the properties for those natural values. And in this southern part of the system, if you look on this area that's just to the west of Superior, down there, we're looking at potentially being able to reintroduce ferrets and having active prairie dog colonies on our properties is one of the features that we're going to need to have in order to reintroduce ferrets. Another area on the northern part of our system in the previous slide is Rabbit Mountain, and that's another area where we have the ability to control and manage the system a little bit more carefully, and so we can allow prairie dogs to flourish in some of these HCA areas, and we're going to be able to avoid most of the impacts that might happen offsite onto adjacent private lands. So I just wanted to mention that we sort of have these two highlighted areas of HCAs. We do have them in other parts of our system where we have important environmental sites and environmental values. Let's see, I think let's go to the next slide. And here we're gonna take time now to listen to Rob talk about our prairie dog removal summary. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Jeff. Again, my name is Rob Alexander, and I work for the Agricultural Resources Division. And I'm going to summarize our removal efforts for 2020. And before I get into the numbers, I just want to remind folks of a few things. Many of you are very familiar with our prairie dog management plan and our operations, but we always have some newcomers who are not as familiar. So many of you have heard this before, but I think it's important to emphasize some of these points. And so the first thing is, as Jeff said, the removal efforts are all on NPDs. That's no prairie dog areas. The majority of these NPDs are agricultural land and primarily cropland, irrigated and dryland cropland. There's agricultural land under lease that are rangelands. So that is native grasslands or even introduced grasslands, introduced species grasslands. We do not include those in NPDs. Those are classified as either MOAs or HCAs. And we do not, I think it's important to emphasize as well that we do not remove prairie dogs from grasslands for the purposes of providing forage to cattle. So everything we're talking about tonight is NPD because it's cropland. There are some NPDs that can be, they're an NPD because they are revegetated grassland. And while those are being established, those are classified as NPDs. Our removal is by lethal control. There's no sugarcoating of that. The methods that we use to remove prairie dogs from the NPD areas are live trapping and using compressed carbon monoxide or carbon monoxide from cartridges. When we live trap, part of those animals are euthanized and donated to raptor rehabilitation. We also support the Ferret Recovery Center. And so those animals are live trapped and they're transported to the Ferret Center. And as I said, the majority of our lethal control, of course, is poisoning by carbon monoxide. And it's compressed carbon monoxide from a machine via hoses that are inserted into the ground. And that's the primary method. And you'll see in the numbers the breakdown. We also use, to a much lesser extent, carbon monoxide cartridges. They're cartridges, basically smoke cartridges, and the carbon monoxide from those cartridges poison the prairie dogs. Those are usually used on small numbers or after we have gone through with the machines. Next slide, please. So as we look at we're about to look at some numbers. It's important to look that since 2018, we've added a lot of NPD acreage. All the properties you've seen below are agricultural properties. The entirety of the top 6 properties are no prairie dog areas. The Hicks-Stitzel property is partly cropland and has some grassland on it. So part of it is NPD, part of it is MOA. Okay, next slide, please. So this kind of tracks the trend since 2016. We have in the left column the year, the next column, the total number of NPD acres. And these are arrived at from mapping once a year, usually in the late winter, early spring of each year. It's a big effort, takes a lot of time. It's not precise, but it is fairly accurate. The middle column are acres of colonies treated. Okay, so this also includes acres that get retreated. And I'll go into this explanation a little bit more here in a second. The last column is the percentage of NPD areas as a percentage of prairie dogs on NPD areas. So you can see the important story here is that we are whittling away at the percent coverage of prairie dog colonies on NPDs. Now, if you take the previous slide, and there's 534 new acres of land that we've gotten since 2018, that could make it dilute the effect of our removal efforts. But if you take that 534 acres out, that 2.5% goes to 2.6%. So even without adding all those acres that had no prairie dogs on them, you take those out, it's still, we're making progress. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so these are the numbers of the removal. Every day we track every activity we do with respect to prairie dog removals, numbers trapped, property, the hours. We track every aspect of our removal efforts. So in 2020, we trapped 1,265 prairie dogs. And you can see the breakdown there of the prairie dogs that went to Raptor Rehabilitation Center and what went to the Ferret Recovery Center. And I think Susan will get into this later talking about ferrets, but the center is dependent to a very large extent on the prairie dogs that we provide for them. The total number of burrows treated was 37,217. It's a big number. It's important to remember that is not animals. I mean, there's many burrows per animal. It's difficult to estimate the number of animals. It's a lot. Removals occurred on 34 properties, and we have some maps to give you a sense of where the removal happened. The majority of our removal that you'll see in the next slides happened on one complex of properties where we've been concentrating our efforts for the last several years. Part of our removal efforts involve our agricultural tenants. Once we do initial removal of a property, we prefer that the tenants take over any returning animals. They're there every day. They see the property. They are able to get them quickly, and usually it's a relatively smaller number of animals. Our goal is, once a property is cleared, is to keep it that way and minimize the number of prairie dogs that have to be removed. So you can see in 2020, we had 11 tenants that had permits. We have a process where we train the tenants. They have to attend class. We have a written permit that has a map on it of the areas they're permitted to do removal from. It gives guidelines for the methods, gives guidelines for where, reporting. So it's not, we have a great deal of control on that process. Tenants, you can see the 10 tenants treated nearly 7,000 of those burrows. That's the 7,000 is part of the 37. Okay, next slide, please. So this is a map of what we refer to as the AHI complex. This is a large area, about 1,700 acres of open space land. This is east of Longmont. You can see on the north, it's bounded by Nelson Road. On the south by Oxford. On the west by North 63rd, and on the east by 75th. A number of properties, like I said, together they make about 1,700 acres. The majority of this is agricultural land, most of it irrigated cropland, and two different lessees on these this complex of properties. We discovered several years ago, we started focusing on removal of properties and sticking with it until they were done. In years past, we just discovered that when we didn't, the inability to remove entirely from a property just resulted in those properties repopulating. And we found ourselves that in some cases, removing prairie dogs for 10 years from the same property and spinning our wheels, exposing many more prairie dogs to removal and to lethal control. And so that's why we have focused on this strategy, and it is working. There are some drawbacks, but it seems to be working. This slide shows that between 2018 and 2020, now this is, you can see the change. The red is prairie dog colonies. And in 2018, you can see the change from 2018 to 2020. And again, the majority of our efforts in 2020 have been on this property. Next slide, please. So now the next maps are just a breakdown of the complex going from the north to the south. So this is the northernmost property, the Suits property. You can see not much change there, and that is due to geography, topography. There's some natural barriers that keep those prairie dogs relatively confined. And so we started on the south end of that property and worked our way south. Okay, next slide. So this is the AHI property, 650 acres, large property. We purchased it. There were a lot of prairie dogs on the property. You can see the change from 2018 to 20. You can see there's some colonies that came back into the southeastern portion of that area. That happens. While we cleared that, had it clear in 2019, there were prairie dogs that came from the south back to the north, and that's what happened there. Next slide. So this is the Loggerman Reservoir property, and it's immediately to the south of what we just looked at. And again, you can see 2018 to 2020, we had it completely cleared after 2018. In 2019, we weren't able to get there, and it recolonized from the colony there to the northwest. One of the drawbacks of carbon monoxide, compressed carbon monoxide with these machines is that it is slow. And if you'll notice later in the presentation, Susan's going to show some graphs of the prairie dog populations in the county. And we're at a high point. And that is, I think, reflected in some of the reasons that we see these areas that get repopulated. Now, the second time through, they're not as densely populated, usually. So it's not like we're starting all over again. Okay, next slide, please. So this is the AHI Longmont Farms property, also known as the Turkey Farm. And it was entirely, the NPD areas were entirely cleared in this year. You can see the colonized sections straight east of the reservoir, the red areas in the 2020 map, and that area is critical wildlife habitat. There is a wetland that runs through there. It's wildlife habitat. Prairie dogs are there. We've had burrowing owls there in the past. So those prairie dogs will remain. We are constructing right at the moment, we're constructing barriers to prevent those prairie dogs from migrating to the surrounding NPDs and to our private landowners to the west. Okay, next slide is the last one.
Rob, just a time check. How you doing?
I've got one more map and that's it.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.
Okay. So this is the southern extent of the complex. This is the IMA property, close to 600 acres. Again, it's all NPD. And you can see that from between 2018 and 2020, it was all cleared. Now, we did have to come back on some of this was cleared previously and re-clear it. So in those numbers, the acreages that you see, some of those acreages are going over twice. Okay, next slide. And there's a map of the complex again. It's the same as the first slide we saw, just showing the removals between 2018 and 2020. So our strategy to stick with the property and focus on it is working, and we believe that we are minimizing the number of prairie dogs that we have to remove this way by quite a bit. Again, this is a large property, 1,700 acres. Not all of that occupied, of course, but these colonies are spread over 1,700 acres, gives you an idea of the scope of this project. Very large, very complex, but we are getting there. Okay, Jeff.
All right. Thanks very much, Rob. One of the things that I thought I would just share with everybody is that the staff that we have working on prairie dog management have been, I don't know if you could tell from Rob's descriptions, he knows these properties very well. And so many of the staff that we have working on prairie dog issues are people that have been working for the department for most, if not all, of the 21 years that we've had a prairie dog management plan. So we've got lots of experience doing this and lots of experience with these properties. There's two things I wanted to mention, and then we'll take some questions here with respect to Rob's presentation. One is if you have specific questions about a particular property and our management of that property, it might be helpful to save those for the end. That way other people don't have to get into the actual details of a particular incident, or excuse me, a particular situation that's on your mind. We recognize that you might have those. We'll be happy to handle those at the end. So that's just one question. The other thing, or one point I wanted to make, and then the other thing was that we'll have updated maps on our website, so you can see which properties have which of the classifications on them, and where we've mapped our current prairie dog colonies. So with that, I am going to ask if any of our attendees would have any questions at this point, and I will, if you can raise your hand, I'll recognize you, and then Nick will be able to recognize you. And I see Mark Locke. So we're going to allow you to talk and ask your question.
Yeah, so thank you. And I'll just repeat a question I put into the Q&A.
Okay.
Number one, very appreciative of the efforts that you guys have put into this, and it's made a huge difference for property owners around this area. So thank you. The question is more around, it's clear that even in the areas you're showing as cleared, there are a material number of prairie dogs still there now. I spoke to somebody in the county about that recently. And I suppose I would expect in the season there'll be another return through them being there. And the real question is, what is the intention for out years? Would you want to stick with this until you have multiple years when there is clear space, or what's the end point on this? How do you declare victory?
I'm going to take a shot at this, but I think what you're asking is, on a particular property, do we sort of pack up and say, well, we've done it, and we walk away? Is that what you're asking?
Jeff, I think I can.
Okay, go, Rob.
Yeah. Hi, Mark. Yeah, what Mr. Locke is talking about, he's a neighbor of ours to the east of the IMO property, and
Okay.
he sees that on the map we have it cleared, and he sees prairie dogs still out there.
Okay.
Yeah, that particular on a complex this big, once we clear it, there are returning prairie dogs, and we have to go back and continue to remove them. For that particular property, there are prairie dogs on private land to the west that we're seeing some migration from since we got it cleared. So we continue to go back and try to take care of those. Now, once we get done with removal, further to the north, for instance, on the turkey farm, we did removal. Our tenant went in and we leveled holes, did revegetation, and that helps. We'll do the same thing. That helps prevent prairie dogs from coming back. We'll be doing the same thing on the IMO property, and that'll help. We may have to construct a barrier on 63rd to prevent them from coming from the private property.
Rob, do you want to mention the tenant role in that as well?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it earlier, but
yeah.
Once we have cleared a property and removed it entirely, there's a point where the numbers are low enough, or once we've removed, the idea is when prairie dogs return, that the tenant is there and takes responsibility because he's there all the time, sees the property many times a week, if not every day, has the ability to remove that prairie dog as soon as it arrives there to minimize what'll continue to migrate. So our intent in a perfect world is, once we've cleared a property, is for the tenant to take care of that removal.
So can I just follow up? Rob,
Sure.
Thank you. That all makes sense. Is there an intention to do ongoing surveys in some of these properties and to 2 or 3 years, not just be back where we are at because either some tenant doesn't manage that or other considerations? Is this a handoff by the county
No.
at that point?
These properties will be monitored every year, not just once a year. We see these properties many times a year, and it's expensive. It takes a lot of time to get them clear. Our goal is not to lose ground. So there will be
Thank
close
you.
monitoring in the future.
Greatly appreciated. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Great question. Looks like with that, we've answered all the questions that I can see at this point. So Susan, let's move on to your presentation.
All right. Okay, so hi, I'm Susan Spalding, Senior Wildlife Biologist for Parks and Open Space. Let me advance my slide. So here's an overview of what I'll be covering tonight. Colonized acres of prairie dogs on HCAs and MOAs, including new acquisition acreage totals, barrier fencing projects in 2020, burrowing owl status, and black-footed ferret reintroduction goal status. Okay, so in the past 2 years, we've acquired more MOA and HCA acres, and here are the totals. We've added 70 acres of MOA and 227 acres of HCAs, which are basically adjacent to our Rabbit Mountain complex. All right, so here you see our acreage totals of active colonies within HCAs and MOAs. The second column shows how much suitable habitat we have within our designated MOAs and HCAs. And those new acquisition numbers I just showed you are reflected in these totals. So you see that we've had an increase in colony size since 2019 on both categories. So next, I'm going to show you this in graph form. So this table shows trends of acres on HCAs since 2001. And many of you have seen this before, but from high levels of colonization in 2004, we had plague show up in 2005 and work its way south through the county to the South County Grasslands by 2008. But since then, we've seen significant recovery, and the recovery has continued in 2020. So I think we can attribute this continued recovery to general population recovery trajectories and our plague abatement strategies, which I will discuss later. So here's our MOA data. And here we actually have more colonized acres than we've ever had since 2001 on our MOAs. So some of this was acquisitions that we acquired that had prairie dogs on them, and some was colony growth. So you can basically see the same trend based on the plague patterns and then the general recovery. But these areas were less impacted by the plague due to their isolation from each other. MOAs are basically not typically contiguous, and so they're a little insulated from plague vectors. So these are just the numbers combined. You can see that in 2020, we had a total across these acres of 3,670 active prairie dog colonies, and that's overall in our system. So with some caveats, we're doing pretty good. Okay, so next, prairie dog barrier fencing. So each year I give an update on how many barrier fences we've installed during the year, and here's the total for 2020. So barrier fencing is a non-lethal option to limit impacts to neighbors, or in some cases to our own agricultural lands. When these barriers are shared with neighbors, we do cost sharing with them. So this year we installed 2,600 feet of barrier fencing, so basically half a mile. So the cost of materials was about $3,200 plus the labor to install them. These barriers are accomplished with volunteers, staff, and neighbors, depending on the project. All right, so next I'm going to give an overview of our burrowing owl program in 2020. Our subspecies of burrowing owls are dependent on prairie dog burrows for nesting. They're listed as state threatened and a priority species of special concern for the county. They represent one of our main focus species for our wildlife program. All right, so here's the nesting success for Boulder County and the City of Boulder open space and mountain parks since 2008. And you'll see that 2020 was a moderately successful year for us. So the numbers for 2020 reflect 5 nests on City of Boulder and 2 nests on Boulder County open space. The city's nests fledged 11 and our 2 nests fledged 8 combined. So one thing of interest this year was that we had a nest established on our Two Creeks open space, which is in East Boulder County. And this nest occurred in the burrowing owl conservation area that we designated into the management plan back in 2010. But since 2010, there's been significant development adjacent to this open space. So we were starting to get worried about the continued use of this site by owls. So the owls nested on Two Creeks in 2001, 2006, 2014, and then again in 2020. So that represents a gap of between 5 and 8 years between nestings. So this once again shows generational nest site fidelity and how land managers shouldn't ever discount the possibility of repeat nesting in an area, even if it's been quite some time. All right, so when we have nesting burrowing owls, we implement protection measures, including temporary trail closures and protection plans. And in order to find the owls in the first place, which is challenging, we have a robust monitoring program that started in 2008 in a collaborative partnership with Boulder County Nature Association. This program has grown over the years, and during 2020, 26 volunteers devoted 312 total hours to the training, surveys, and data compilation efforts. We need this level of effort to monitor all of our properties, including NPDs, as there's no way we could do this using only our staff. So we remain very grateful to our excellent monitors. And as I mentioned, if we have nesting owls in areas with ag leases, we implement owl protection plans. Wildlife staff works in close coordination with the tenants in these cases. In 2020, we did have a nest on a leased agricultural property, and our tenant was very accommodating and appreciated the direct line of communication and frequent updates. So next we'll talk about our progress and status towards potential ferret reintroductions. So as a quick review, in order to host self-sustaining populations of wild ferrets, which is 20 females and 10 males, we will need 1,500 acres of active prairie dog colonies. So this number is based on the home range of a female ferret, which requires 75 acres of active prairie dog colonies to survive and raise young. So in order to try to grow our colonies to reach that 1,500 acre mark, we've been implementing plague control measures. So plague represents the greatest impact to prairie dogs and ferrets, so we need to mitigate this threat. The first method we used is called Delta Dust. It's an insecticide that controls the fleas that carry the plague bacteria. So all acres at the South County Grasslands and the majority of Rabbit Mountain were dusted in 2020. And we'll complete dusting at Rabbit as soon as possible in 2021. So the second method we use is SPV, which stands for Sylvatic Plague Vaccine. So in 2020, SPV was distributed on all of our colonies within our properties at the South County Grasslands and Rabbit Mountain. And this, of course, it sustains healthy populations of prairie dogs, which also helps many associated species, including raptors, coyotes, bobcats, and badgers, and many others, as we know. So this slide gives a summary of what this effort entails and the associated costs since we started the program, basically started our plague abatement program in 2016. So you can see it requires significant funding, but also many hours of labor to implement. Okay, so to remind you, this is what the South County Grassland area looks like. And here's the general vicinity. You can see on the west, that's Highway 93, and on the south, that's Highway 128. On the north is Marshall Road, and on the east is McCaslin. So this large area is owned both by Parks and Open Space and the City of Boulder Open Space and Mountain Parks. It comprises 6,700 acres in total. And at our highest level of prairie dog occupancy in this general area, we had about 1,600 acres of active prairie dog colonies. So currently there's a total of 175 active acres. So we have a long way to go. This is due to some intermittent plague events that we've been experiencing, and 2019, we also lost on our open space lands quite a few prairie dogs in that event. And also for clarification, please remember that not all of those acres are suitable habitat for prairie dogs. They would never occupy this entire site as they don't like slopes more than about 20%, nor do they like certain soil profiles. So basically, we don't have much more than about 1,800 acres of suitable habitat within this overall area. All right, so Rabbit Mountain. Here's the overview, which is the other potential for ferret releases and our second largest HCA. We saw an increase in colony size in the past year of about 100 acres. So we now have almost 1,200 acres in this complex. So the whole area is around 5,000 acres total, and about a third of that acreage is suitable for prairie dogs. So with this continued success at Rabbit, we are encouraged about the future potential for ferrets here. So pretty good news at Rabbit Mountain. Okay, so next I want to move to the Carolyn Holmberg Preserve at Rock Creek Farm Management Plan update. So in 2019 and 2020, the department updated this plan. And we heard from many of you during the public comment periods, and we really appreciate your input. The plan is available on the POS website under management plans, and the link is shown here too, if you want to review it. So I wanted to give you an overview of the decisions made related to prairie dogs in this recent plan. So this map is pulled from the plan and shows the property acreage and the designations. To orient you, this is, let's see, on the east side, it's a Highway 287. And then on the north side is the Northwest Parkway. So that kind of gives you an idea of where we are. So the categorization of the property, the orange is NPD, the green is HCA, and the purple areas are MOA. And you can see there the total acreage of those designations are listed on the map. The main decision impacting prairie dogs in the plan is the removal of the purple 40-acre site shown surrounded by the orange NPD areas. This area was set aside many years ago to host prairie dogs and burrowing owls, but it is problematic to maintain both from an agricultural perspective and from a wildlife perspective. So the prairie dogs located in this area will be relocated to the South County Grasslands. This will not occur in 2021 as we need to develop a very careful and specific plan related to prairie dogs for the entire property in 2021. So as the plan reflects, we wish to consolidate the prairie dog acreage to the southern half of the property within the purple and green areas, but also improve the vegetation condition in those areas. So this will be an important balance to strike, and we'll be reaching out to subject matter experts and researchers. We envision this to be a formal process with many check-ins with the public during the year. So just know that we're committed to maintaining prairie dogs on the site as the emphasis, and we will proceed with caution to ensure we get it right as we implement this plan. All right, so that's the end of my presentation, and we'll take questions.
Thank you very much, Susan. Let's see here. So yeah, I think you all are probably able to see the variety of things that our department does on our system with respect to prairie dog management. So you know, Rob, just to summarize really quickly, Rob detailed the work that we're doing on management of prairie dogs on our agricultural, especially cultivated cropland, NPD removal areas. And then Susan was able to talk about the kinds of programs we have going on our MOA and HCA programs. So you can see the plan has a lot of diversity in our management style, again, going back to the particular geographic situation of all of our properties. So it's a complex thing, but we have a plan that helps us perform this work, and then staff that are outstanding at what they do. So are there any questions? I don't see any. Oh, good, we're getting some hands up. Okay, great. So I'm going to start with Theo Kuhn.
Hello, can you hear me?
We sure can, Theo.
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing anyone else.
Oh, but you're on though. Can you hear me? Can you hear us, Theo?
Let's go back to Theo.
Okay.
Hi, sorry. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Microphone issues. Thank you for the presentations and for taking the time to go through all of that, and for taking our questions. My name is Theo Kuhn. I work for Front Range Nesting Bald Eagle Studies, and just wanted to ask a question about raptors in general, not just bald eagles. Studies by, or I guess I'll start off by saying that in the prairie dog element, with regard to raptors, it mentions, that that studies are done by BCPOS and with partnering organizations like Boulder County Nature Association to sort of understand the relationship between prairie dogs and raptors. And what those studies, many of those studies have shown, including the specific ones I'm talking about are by Steve Jones with the Boulder County Nature Association and Boulder County Audubon Society. They've shown over the past several decades, severe declines in the populations of wintering raptors, such as the fruginous hawk, which depends on prairie dogs, as well as wintering golden eagles. These are birds, so these studies have helped to show that these birds very heavily depend on prairie dogs. And so I guess my question is, at what point will that information then be, further applied, or in what ways will that information be applied, seeing as we have this, severe decline in these wintering raptors, and this is largely due to the loss of prairie dog habitat and fragmentation, largely on private land. It's up to open space to, counter that decline. And my question is, if no changes are proposed to the prairie dog element, how are we going to get to a place where those declines are halted and hopefully we can see some increases?
That's a great question, Theo. Susan, do you,
so Theo make a good point about the declines, and we're well aware that we're having serious declines, especially fruginous hawk, like you mentioned. So our plague abatement strategies and how we're trying to grow our prairie dog colonies on our HCAs, that's not just for ferrets, but that's for everybody that relies on prairie dogs, right? And it's true that it's kind of hard to see the development happening all around in Boulder County. I mean, it's just happening. We're losing colonies on private property to development, et cetera. So our open space is even more absolutely precious for maintaining prairie dogs that support these other great species that we have in Boulder County. As you know, our golden eagle nesting, we have a lot of golden eagles nesting in the Front Range, really high population numbers for them, and that is prairie dogs. They're utilizing our prairie dog colonies. So yeah, we understand the importance, and we're just trying to keep our prairie dogs on the landscape and keep them safe from plague, basically, is what we're trying to do now.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Theo. Next on the list here is Ron Roble. Ron, are you able to
hear me now?
Yeah, we sure can.
Okay. I think this question is probably for Susan also.
Okay.
One of your earlier photos was this bobcat eyeballing the prairie dog. And in the last 6 months or whatever, I've had bobcat showing up pretty regularly around here. I think he's taken up residence, or her, whatever it is. So I guess my question is, we've got the eagles and the hawks and the owls and the coyotes and the whole works out here, but and I border the open space on two sides of it. So I've got the prairie dogs on two sides of me. So my question is any idea how many prairie dogs bobcats actually corner and get for a meal?
That's a fun question. So what we have observed with bobcats is they will sit at the edge of a burrow right as it's getting light in the morning, and they sit upwind from, well, let's see, so the wind doesn't carry their scent to the prairie dog right in the morning, and then they wait for the prairie dog to poke its head out very first thing in the morning, and they nab them. So they're not always successful, but that's kind of a strategy that we see them using. I don't know how many have been documented being taken by bobcats. My guess is some bobcats are really good at catching prairie dogs and some aren't as good, individual differences.
Yeah.
if they could catch one every other day, they'd probably be pretty lucky. But yeah, they definitely use prairie dogs as well.
Okay. I guess my other comment is, probably for Rob, appreciate what you're doing out here it's an NPD, so Larry's doing a good job. So that's my comment for Rob. So.
Thank you. All right, next on the list looks like it's Dwayne Dugan, if I'm pronouncing that right. Dwayne, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Thanks for
All right.
the question.
Yeah.
I live on Kincoast Drive, and there's a sidewalk on county property that goes down to Heatherwood School. And when the kids go down to Heatherwood School in the morning, the prairie dogs from the Erdl property scatter like rats on the way down there. So that's my concern, keeping the prairie dogs off that property where the kids walk to school every day, and that come over from the Erdl property. So I'm more interested in trying to figure out how I can get something going to get a barrier to keep those prairie dogs off of that sidewalk path.
All right, thanks. That it turns out that property is actually owned and managed by the City of Boulder Open Space and Mountain Parks.
That'd be the Erdl property, right? But not the strip of ground that's in the county that's along the sidewalk that goes to the school. That's in the county.
Oh, you mean like in our county right of way?
Yeah, it would be. I mean, it was part of the Heatherwood subdivision, just to the north of the edge of the Erdl property on the very south part of Heatherwood. So like when you walk down to the school, there's literally hundreds of prairie dogs that scatter as you walk down the sidewalk, which is located in the county. So, I'm not trying to say like who's responsible for it. I'm trying to get something instituted for the neighborhood to keep the prairie dogs onto the Erdl property if we can do that, because that's not in a no prairie dog land from what I can tell. So
yeah, well, I'll tell you what, we can it sounds like we can definitely look into this specific situation. It sounds like the larger colony might be on, would you say the larger colony itself is on the city's property?
When you look on Google Earth, you can see it, literally from space, all the colonies to the south of Heatherwood. It started at like 75th Street, and I've been here 38 years, and it's just worked its way east.
Okay.
Gradually denuded all the property on the Erdl part. So
yeah.
Anyway,
go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, if there's anybody I can talk to later, because I don't want to dominate the time now, but I would like to work on this as a project. So
yeah, we will. We can get you some answers for that, and we can help. If nothing else, we should be able to most certainly determine who the land management agency and who you should be working with. So we can work with you on that.
Sounds good. I'm easy to find. Just Google my name and you'll find me.
Okay, that's great.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. Well, as far as I can tell, I think that's all the questions that I saw with hands raised. Oh, maybe we got one more. Paula Hansley. Can you hear us, Paula?
Can you hear me?
We sure can, Paula.
Okay, this question is for Susan. Do you have a feeling as to how large a prairie dog town needs to be before it attracts burrowing owls? Or maybe I should say how small it can be and still attract a burrowing owl.
Yeah, that's a good question. We've had owls show up on 6 prairie dog holes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so usually so I'm just trying to think of what we've seen. We had owls nesting stayed out at the South County Grasslands. We had a plague event, and there were sort of 5 or 6 prairie dogs left and a few open burrows, and they nested right there, and they were there for years. So we've also had them on like literally 2 or 3 holes that were abandoned by prairie dogs. So yeah, they'll use areas like that. All the research will tell you that they prefer larger colonies, and they like to be in the middle of the colony. because they utilize the prairie dog alarm calls and things to benefit themselves. But yeah, sometimes they break the rules here in Boulder County.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Let's see. It looks like we've got another person named Denise Pinkard. Do you have a question for us? Hi, Denise. Can you hear us?
There. Am I coming through now?
You sure are.
Oh, super. I'll try to make this quick because I know we need to move on. But in listening to the different presentations, Rob's and Susan's, I'm having a hard time understanding the different ways you're quantitating the numbers of prairie dogs. So for example, in Rob's presentation, he's talking about number of burrows, and we don't know how many prairie dogs that they're mitigating in those instances. And then Susan's talking about, for example, the MOAs, 3,600 active prairie dog colonies. So what's a colony? Can you help me kind of compare these numbers? Because I'm just curious.
Great question. Susan, do you want to answer that?
So the question is, what's a colony? Is that right? Okay.
Well, sure. Yeah. What's a colony? And, I'm trying to compare that to the numbers that Rob presented for mitigating prairie dogs, and he's using numbers of burrows. So, okay. So they have whatever it was, 37,000 number of burrow. That might not be the right number. So how do you quantitate that into number of colonies? And then what is a colony? Do you see what I'm trying to do? Is understand.
Yeah. Okay. So,
terms here for me at least.
So my presentation and what we keep track of for the HCAs and MOAs and NPDs as well, we actually go out and annually map the outline of the colonies, so the area where the prairie dogs are living. So that's the colony. And then what Rob's numbers reflect are the numbers of burrows that are treated within multiple colonies annually on NPDs to remove prairie dogs. So a colony can be sort of densely populated with lots of burrows, or it can be sparsely populated with not a lot of burrows, depending on the soil type and where they are. So there's no like set number of burrows per colony, if that's helping to make sense of this.
Well, I think so, but I think I had a basic maybe assumption that it was confusing me. So, for example, if you have 60 acres of prairie dogs and you have boundary on it, you're going out and you're calling out one colony from what I'm hearing. And I thought that there was multiple colonies or colonies within that property. So that's why that's where I was confused.
Yeah, so you have a colony and that's the larger complex, but then you have coteries within the colony. So you have groups of family oriented sort of coteries within the bigger colony, if that helps. I don't know.
So each individual property you have that has borders that are non-prairie dogs is called one colony.
Well, no, the colonies are, it's an actual footprint of where the prairie dogs are living. So many coteries within one colony. So one blob is one colony within like the property. I don't know if that's helping.
Yeah, I think I got it. I think I understand it. I had I guess an assumption that was incorrect as far as.
I could go back and show you a map. Would that help?
Nope. I think I've got it. But thank you so much for your time. I'll let you guys move on. I appreciate your explanation.
Okay.
Thank you, Denise. Good question. It looks like we have a question from Lindsay Sterling Crank. Lindsay, can you hear us?
Okay.
Yay.
Hi. I was just wondering, the last question made me think, just system-wide, it seems like the county's putting a lot more resources towards lethal management and removal of prairie dogs. And I just wonder, is that accurate? Or it seems like there's so much more space where we're trying to remove prairie dogs from than when we're trying to actually conserve them. And I just wonder if that's accurate, or what is the, how does that go? How does that actually play out? I mean,
oh, go ahead.
That's it. Just seems like there's a lot more resources and attention focused on non-prairie dog areas and prairie dog removal areas and removal.
That's a great point. I think Rob might want to answer this. I think when we have places that are categorized as no prairie dog, I think our agricultural program feels like we owe it to our tenants to meet that, to try and meet that goal. So we're going to be spending money to try and reach that. And Rob, do you have something you want to add, or am I?
Yeah, no, you're going down the right road. Yeah, and you're right, Lindsay, we do. We spend a lot of resources. There's two things. One is the impacts to the agricultural tenants. We're trying to preserve agriculture. We have to preserve our tenants. And it's a significant economic impact to them, to us. And it continues. If we spent less on removal, the amount of crop damages and resource damage would increase dramatically. The value of the water alone on our irrigated land, not what we paid for, but what it's worth right now, is hundreds of millions of dollars, about $300 million. This is an investment in preservation of agriculture. So we're trying to protect that investment. We're trying to protect the resource, basically the soil and water, and keep those operations viable. So it is, I guess it's the urgency that.
It just seems like a lot of the same, and a lot of the same is not working. And we're just fighting prairie dogs and fighting prairie dogs and fighting prairie dogs. And it causes a lot of conflict in our community. And I wish that we could employ some techniques and some feelings where we're leaning into this conflict and trying to figure out coexistence more, and look at regenerative agriculture techniques more, and look at things that we can do to not just remove this native keystone species that provides ecosystem services that we don't even quantify the loss that we're losing. Prairie dogs are not the only thing that are causing soil damage, and we can't just remove this one species and think we're going to positively affect and regenerate and restore this whole system. This is agriculture that needs to change too. And I think we need to broaden our horizons.
Thanks, Lindsay. Susan, did you want to add anything from your side on budget stuff, or are we good there?
I think that's good, thanks.
Okay, yep. Looks like we have Dana Bovey. Dana, can you hear us?
I can.
All right.
I think I'm waiting. So Teresa is going to handle a general Q&A session. Is that, did I get that straight?
So Teresa has been answering. I just took a look at the Q&A. I don't know how to phrase this, but the section of the Zoom meeting that is the Q&A. So I can't remember. She's been answering many questions in that written questions that are coming to us from that. And then we're also taking these live questions. Did that help answer that anyway?
Jeff, I mean, kind of where I would focus on question, where does it belong? Should I wait until, a little bit further on, or?
No, we're done with our presentations. We're at a point where for people who feel comfortable writing a question to us, that's fine. We'll get back to you on that. If you want to, if you would like to ask a question now live, that would be fine too. Your choice.
All right, well, I'll go ahead. So in Susan's comment to, or response to Theo, what I heard was, yes, there's, golden eagles are doing well. There's lots of them. There was conversation about burrowing owls, those two species of concern. And it's, my impression was, in terms of management of prairie dogs, including around nests, including bald eagle nests and territory that other raptors use, like the MOA property over by the hygiene nest. My sense was that there would be a management process that would be kind of focused upon preserving prairie dogs for species that are in jeopardy or declining. I interpreted that, Susan's response was that if you're not declining, open spaces prairie dog management plan, including those areas, within half mile of nest, really aren't being considered if those species aren't declining in some way. And that doesn't, I don't really quite understand that. It doesn't add up for me.
Okay.
Yeah, I can answer that, but it wasn't my intention to say that only if you're declining do prairie dogs matter to you. All of our raptors have great importance to our program, including bald eagles. So prairie dogs also support bald eagles, and we totally recognize that. So I didn't mean to suggest it was only those declining.
I might have gotten that wrong, Susan. So, so my question then is, and I posed this to Jeff, and where are we going? Where are we going with this? What my understanding is that open space staff and management proposes no changes to the current plan. There's been a lot of comments, as I said, to in the communication with Jeff and by some others. There were a lot of comments through the CHP, the Holmberg process. Our group has sent in, last year and through this year, a number of comments about some of the changes that we think should be made and considered, and some problems in the language with respect to NPD and MOAs. Where will there be time for discussion, or will there be no discussion about, so staff thinks that there needs to be no changes. A lot of other folks have submitted comments, and I think really good perspective about why some changes need to be made. Where will there be room to have a discussion with citizens and stakeholders about that, especially when staff doesn't seem to see any need for that?
Yeah. So yeah, I appreciate the comment, Dana. I guess what I would say is that with respect to the Carolyn Holmberg project, we have that, we presented our recommendations, and then the public, and we got lots of public comment, and our advisory board and the county commissioners, made a recommendation, approved that plan. And then Susan explained what that implementation of that plan is likely to look like. So, for us as a staff, we've the public got an opportunity to make comments, and we made our recommendation, the board approved it, and so we're on to the implementation phase for that management plan. For larger questions about, the county's prairie dog plan and particular aspects of it, I mean, if there are many people that feel like we need to revisit the prairie dog plan, then that is going to be something for our department and for those elected officials that approve that plan to prioritize that work.
So where will that happen? How does that happen? Just specific, I'll go over it again really on a postage stamp, and that is that we'll just use Holmberg or hygiene, I think that's Prairie as an example. We've made the point that within 1/2 mile of those bald eagle nests, like let's go to hygiene, that's an MOA. There's a lot of MOA over at Stearns. The language in the policy allows, up to 99.9% removal of prairie dogs on MOA properties, even those within 1/2 mile of those bald eagle nests, which territories are mutualistically shared with wintering, say, ferruginous hawks and golden eagles at the hygiene nests come and spend a fair amount of time with other raptors and whomever else. So the question is, so we hear from staff that, oh, well, we would never do that. We would never remove too many prairie dogs on a property like that. But the language allows you to do that. And we've brought this up before. Teresa said, oh, well, we'll consider that, when the update comes around. Well, we're there now. But it's not being talked about. There's no talk about looking at the language that allows up to almost 100% removal of prairie dogs within 1/2 mile of, say, the hygiene bald eagle nest, where we know that those birds, eat about 40%, 40% of their diet is prairie dogs, and up to, up to 30 or 40% of their prey comes within 1/2 mile of the nest. So that's something that needs to be discussed. Where will there be room for discussion and room for the commissioners to actually, take that one in and consider it?
Well, so I think our department has considered that, and I guess I'm not sure what you're asking. Are you asking where do you go from there?
Well, I'm saying, so you're saying your department says it's fine as it is. We'll allow with our language, we'll keep the language intact to allow the possibility of up to 99.9% removal of prairie dogs within that 1/2 mile of, say, the hygiene nest. So, we've asked again and again, what's your evidence, for saying that past productivity records justify that level of removal? You don't have that data. We've asked for that data and we've never gotten it, or any type of proof that there's been that type of level of removal around so many nests around on and or adjacent to Boulder County open space property. So, but I think what you're saying is that's not, you guys have considered it, but you've ruled it out. Is that what I'm hearing?
I wouldn't say it quite like that. I would say that we've responded to your request when you've raised these issues. We've responded to you. I mean, and I think it's clear that you don't agree with our perspective on that, and so I think that the next stage is we'll need to see if we need to prioritize a re-examination of the prairie dog habitat element. And I mean, that's just something that we can't unilaterally do as a department, because again, it's okay. Yep. So, all right. Okay. Thanks, Dana.
Can I weigh in here real quick?
Sure, Susan.
So I understand Dana's concerns definitely. And I understand, Dana, your question about what will be the process to update the prairie dog element? When will it be open again? And I think that's a departmental conversation we're having for sure. So that conversation is occurring. So one thing we are doing with bald eagle nests internally, I mentioned a prairie dog, or I'm sorry, a burrowing owl protection plan that we have. We're looking at developing something similar for bald eagle nests on our properties. So you mentioned the hygiene nest. And so we're working on a plan with our ag group. And then that would translate to the tenant as well as how we want that area sort of managed with the bald eagles in mind, to make sure that we're not disturbing them unnecessarily with, you know, activities by the tenant, unless it's normal activities that are, you know, agricultural activities. So we're looking at sort of taking that process for burrowing owls and the protection plans for them, and we're looking to use them for bald eagles. So that's one thing that we're doing at the department level too.
Well, I don't want to hog too much because I've hogged a lot of time here. Maybe, you know, I still have questions. I mean, Susan, maybe I could shoot you an email and try to get a better understanding of where this might be headed, or where we might provide a little bit more feedback. I mean, it just is a concern with not just the bald eagles, but, you know, that wintering ferruginous hawk that's there, the one over at Holmberg, the golden eagles that come and share, you know, come and feast on the prairie dogs. We're not saying don't take away any prairie dogs there. I think you know that. We just want to make sure that there's language that's reasonable and is balanced to make sure that not too many are taken away that will impact all of those species of special concern.
Yep. Okay. Hey, thanks, Dana. Appreciate it. Let's move on to Suzanne Webble. Can you hear us, Suzanne? Hi, Suzanne. Are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. Okay. Hi, and thanks for the presentation.
Yeah.
I have two questions, of course. Both of them, I guess, have to do with urging you to keep the balance between managing prairie dogs and other wildlife, but also other priorities for Boulder County, parks and open space, including recreation, agriculture, and neighbors. So the first question, well, starts out with a thank you to Rob and his crew for mitigating the prairie dogs at the AHI complex. As you know, I live just west of there, and we are overrun with prairie dogs, which are not largely yours. They are largely OSMPs. Do you have any plans to coordinate your future mitigation of prairie dogs with OSMP is the first question. And also then the second question before I run out here is, do you take into consideration the effect of trails on prairie dogs and other wildlife like burrowing owls? And how does that relate to trails that have been promised in the past or in the future as the colonies of prairie dogs spread? For example, if there were, let's say, a hypothetical trail that had been approved in a previous management plan, there were no prairie dogs, and now there are. Well, you know, which came first, the trail or the prairie dogs, or does it matter? Can we have both? So complicated, two-pronged questions.
Yeah, those are both really good ones, Suzanne. Maybe let's take the last one first because it's freshest in my memory. And I would just say that I think you know, as we're looking at placing, like if we're doing a management plan for a particular property and looking at where we're going to locate a trail, I think it's very fair to say that the interdisciplinary team is going to look at where that trail is going to end up on the landscape and take into consideration wildlife and prairie dog colonies. Susan, would you want to add any more about that?
Well, yeah, that's a good summary. And I would say that we have trails through prairie dog colonies. I don't think it would stop a trail that's already been promised. I'm not sure we have that situation, but if it did occur, it wouldn't stop a trail. We would passively relocate the prairie dogs typically and put the trail in and then try to keep them off the trail. But yeah, I think trails and prairie dogs are compatible.
Great. Thank you for that.
Yep. And then the second part was coordination between the two large open space land management agencies in Boulder County. And I would say that, we work, the staffs between the two agencies work closely together on all kinds of issues. And especially when our properties are adjacent to each other, I think our staffs are pretty, aware of what's going on each other's property. I would just say that for us, we always have to sort of fall back on that plan that was publicly reviewed and, ultimately approved by the county commissioners. And so if that is, in as much as we need to follow that plan, so we can't, for example, we couldn't remove prairie dogs from an HCA, let's say, just because the city had some adjacent property or something. So, but I think it would make sense, and I think Rob maybe can speak to this a little bit, but I think we probably also try and work with neighbors on this too. Rob, do you want to add anything here? Maybe not.
Yeah, just trying to get my video on. Yeah, we do try to communicate and respond to our neighbors, whether they're private landowners or the city of Boulder. And I think our record is showing that we've got a long list of neighbors that we've been working with. And while we don't always have the results yet, I think most of our neighbors, well, we've got a long list that I think are pleased with the fact that we're working together with them. And when it comes to specifically City of Boulder Open Space, the Mountain Parks as a neighbor, yeah, we certainly, as Jeff said, we communicate and coordinate on a lot of things. With respect to prairie dogs specifically, we are just now, we have very few properties that are adjacent where we have prairie dogs as an issue. Although now we do have a couple that are relatively new. And so, in fact, we've started a little conversation on one of those properties. But the fact is, we don't have that many properties adjacent, city land, county land adjacent where we've got prairie dogs. Nearby, but not adjacent.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Rob. Thank you very much, Suzanne. Let's see, I show a couple more people who've already asked questions, but I'll just check in and see if they have some remaining questions. It's a little after 6:30. And so I just wanted to, before we get to people who might have some repeat questions here, or some repeat folks who want to ask some new questions, I just wanted to thank everybody for taking the time, for listening to us, and for engaging with us on our prairie dog management. Really appreciate all of the really good questions. And we'll this, like I mentioned at the very beginning, this is not a conversation that will end tonight. I know it'll keep going forward, and we appreciate your thoughts, and we'll see you again next year. So feel free, if you need to depart, I'll check with these last two people and see if they still have some questions, and we'll go from there. So Denise Pinker, do you have a new question?
I do.
Okay.
I have one question for Rob, but before that, I wanted to give a shout out to all of you for a very good presentation. And it had a lot of good information, and I've been watching you for a number of years, watching this whole prairie dog try to balance it. And this is a really tough issue. And you guys have I appreciate what a tough position it is. I know you take a lot of heat. And I do believe you're doing the best that you can, and I've seen improvements over the years. So I just wanted to thank you for that.
Thank you.
And then my question for Rob, and maybe this was on your financials slide, Rob, I do not recall, but I understand there was a pretty significant vandalism of mitigation equipment that happened on Boulder County property this past year. I'd like to know a little bit more about that, what the property, what you lost, the financial dollars and equipment of taxpayers, equipment we lost, and how that was replaced, I guess, and just how much of your budget went to that issue. Could we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and the damage was we didn't have to replace anything. It was all taken care of with repairs. About $25,000 worth of repairs. It did set us back. I think it was about 3 days before we were able to secure some other equipment and get back to work, while the rest of our equipment was being repaired. Again, about $24,000 worth of repairs that it cost us. We didn't have to replace any of the equipment. And we take measures now that the equipment's locked up every evening. So we don't anticipate we'll see that again.
Very good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep. Thanks, Denise. And then let's see if Ron Robel has another question.
Actually, I was going to make a comment about the burrowing owl.
Okay.
This is a personal experience we had with them. Just before the county bought the open space that borders me, but there was a little bit of a high spot. It's all flat, but there's a little bit of a high spot just east of our house. And they moved into one of the vacant burrows, and they were there for about 5 years. And every evening about dusk would go out and watch them doing their little thing, and they didn't seem to care that it was just, right across the fence from our house. So I think they evidently picked their spot based on where they want it and not where everything else is. And the only thing I could attribute it to was the fact that the irrigation water didn't get up onto that high spot. Mm-hmm. And perhaps that was one of their criteria. They didn't want to be drowned out either, just like we don't.
Yeah.
So that was our experience. And that's been a long time ago, but I'm sure they still act the same. However they pick out their spot, they're going to do it based on what they like. So that was my comment about, the personal experience with them.
Thanks very much.
Well, and Ron, if you see them again, will you let us know?
Yeah, I will. But like I say, that was a long time ago. That was before the county even, owned the ground, and it was still being farmed, some crop and some pasture at that time. Is it's the IBM, what we call the IBM open space, right?
Yeah.
Which is all grazing now, thank God. It's all rocks. I don't know how they ever farmed it. But yeah, if I see them again, I'll definitely let you know.
That's
great.
Thanks so much, Ron. All right, well, I think we've answered all the live questions now at this point. I don't see any more hands raised, I don't believe. And Therese, did we have any that you that we needed to share from the Q&A, or are we?
We had 2 questions on particular properties. One was on when the 63rd Street fence was going to be completed, and another question was do we have any plans to remove prairie dogs off the Hirschfeld property? What's the timeline for that? So Rob, maybe you could answer those 2 questions.
Sure, I answered those online, but for the rest of the audience, 63rd Street, and Prospect, we anticipate that barrier fence to be completed by the end of February. or shortly thereafter. And in terms of Hirschfield, that is on our plans to begin next year. It will take multiple years for that property to be completed.
Okay. All right. Let's see. It looks like we may have gotten one more, an additional person here. Carol Bayer, do you have a question for us, Carol? Hi, Carol. Can you hear us?
I don't, can you hear me now?
We sure can, Carol.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. I hope you haven't answered this. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear everything that was all the questions. I live in Powderhorn and Gun Barrel and have for more than 20 years, right across from Celestial Seasonings.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I've been with the Prairie Dogs for a long, long time, and I really like them, you know. Our neighborhood next door, you know, the online,
Yeah.
people write. A woman wrote in and said, all our prairie dogs have been killed. This was about a month ago. And I tended to believe her because I go over there all the time and I didn't see any, and I couldn't see any on the road to the airport either. And then they came back. I mean, if they were gone, they came back. And so my point is that we don't get very good information. And I don't know how she got that information, but I could see why she thought they had gone. And also the big project, you know, about the 268 apartments that they want to build right next to Celestial Seasonings.
Yeah.
So my point is that we get very poor information. The camera doesn't do a very good job with it anymore. And so we just, you know, it's hard because I would like to be part of it, and I'd like to know what's happening with the prairie dogs and everything else in my area.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to tell you that if there was some way we could get better information, and since I don't live in Boulder City, you know, that makes a difference too.
Yeah.
So, okay, thanks.
You bet. So that's a great question, and it does bring up the complications of land ownership and which agency is you know, what the land falls, which jurisdiction the property falls in. And in the case of the actual Celestial Seasonings building itself, that is actually within the city of Boulder, and so any kind of management that they're doing on their land, I'm afraid for us at the county, we're probably not going to be able to help inform you very much on what they are doing, what that private landowner is doing. So, and I realize that is a complicating factor for residents in our county. There's a variety of land management agencies, and it's not always clear who's managing which particular property. But in this particular case, the areas around Celestial Seasonings is in the city of Boulder, and you'll have to probably talk to somebody there to find out a little bit more about it. All right, let's see here. Looks like I think we've answered everybody's questions for the moment, and we're at 6:44. So this might be a good time to wrap it up. And again, if people have other questions for us, we have our Prairie Dog webpage. It's very easy to find on our Boulder County Parks and Open Space page. We'll put up some new maps, and we'll have contact information there if you have specific questions about anything. But unless any of our staff have anything else they want to add, I think we might be done with our stakeholder meeting tonight.
Jeff, quick question, Amy here.
Yeah.
I had noticed someone asked if this was being recorded or if they could look back
yeah.
at sometime. Is that a possibility?
It absolutely is. Nick's recorded the whole thing, and I think we'll try and post it probably on that Prairie Dog webpage. Is that right, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get that
Okay.
posted tomorrow.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, I think we'll call it an evening. Thanks again, everybody who hung around, and like I said earlier, this is an ongoing conversation. So appreciate your time tonight. Thanks.